today. I'm Jamie August, the Outreach Program Manager, and I'll be joining Michael Fox and Dr. Shane Doyle today for our presentation. I'll let Michael introduce Shane here in just a moment. Our friends and partners at Streamable Learning are on hand to assist with any IT needs. So if you run into any issues, type those into your chat box. At this point, you should be able to both see me and hear me. Feel free to use the chat box at any point throughout the program today to ask any questions you might have, or we might throw some questions out at you. If we're not able to respond immediately, we'll leave some time at the end of the program to get those questions answered for you. Before we begin, we're just going to spend a few minutes showing you where the Museum of the Rockies is located here in the beautiful Gallatin Valley, Montana. Angie's going to pull that up for me. We're going to look at a quick map, and then we'll turn it over to today's program. All right, there we are in southwest Montana. We're about 80 miles north of Yellowstone National Park and 315 miles south of Canada. One of these pictures shows what it's about to look like here, but not quite. We still have snow on the ground. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Michael. Thanks again for joining us today.
Hello, I'm Michael Fox. I'm a little bit shorter than you. Yes, we are nestled in the beautiful and historic Gallatin Valley, right next to Montana State University. Today we are broadcasting from Storage 1, which is one of the most highly secured areas at the Museum of the Rockies. We keep our large artifacts in here today. And our topic today is about Crow Fair. And Crow Fair is a very important, if not the most important, yearly activity that happens here in the state of Montana. And to tell us a little bit more about it, we are very pleased to have with us Dr. Shane Doyle, a prominent historian from the Apsaalooke, or Crow tribe. Montana State University and Museum of the Rockies is located almost exactly 200 miles from Crow Agency, which is the headquarters of the Crow tribe. And every year they put on a big bash, and it is called Crow Fair. So without further ado, Dr. Shane Doyle.
Awesome. Thank you.
You can actually stand behind it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so then you don't have to scooch down.
Okay. Well, it's just great to be here. Thank you so much for having me, Michael, everyone. It's just a real treat to be here at the museum and to be able to present to you guys on Crow Fair. And as Michael mentioned, Crow Fair is a very important cultural event. It occurs on the Crow Indian Reservation every year, and they say it happens when the choke cherries are ripe. And so that's always during the third week in August. And the encampment is known for its teepees. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. I have some artifacts here from the museum. Some of them are mine that I brought in. Some living artifacts, I guess you could say. Some of these are quite a bit older. If we could just pan the camera down and I could just take a moment to introduce some of these items. This is my personal vest here. And this was made for me by my aunt, Bertie Realbird. And as you can see, it's a beaded bison. And underneath it, it has my Crow name, which is Chilapkalia. And that means Old Buffalo Bull. And it was given to me by my clan father, Victor Singer, many years ago. So very proud of this vest, and I'm very proud of my name. And then sitting up on top of the vest, we have this hand drum here. This hand drum is actually Northern Cheyenne hand drum, made for me by my uncle Conrad Fisher. But I think it kind of highlights the intertribal nature of the way tribes are on the Northern Plains. We have our own traditions. Each tribe has their own traditions, but it's pretty common to see other tribal traditions alongside our own. And so here off to my left, to the camera right, we have a very old example of a elk tooth dress. This elk tooth dress is circa early 1900s, probably made in the late 19th century. Over 122 elk teeth just on this side alone for this little girl's dress. I would say this would fit a girl about 6, 7 maybe 8 years old. So that's quite a few elk teeth for a little girl. And then again, this is a Crow tradition. We see this at Crow Fair. One of the traditions that we know from this dress is that all of these teeth have to be eye teeth from the elk, the ivories. And the ones that are not ivories have been carved and made to look like ivories, and it's very difficult to tell which ones are. I myself wouldn't be able to. I think you would have to look at the color of them. As you notice, they all have a different tone. But again, this is part of the Crow tradition. This is something that's still kept alive today. These dresses are still used today, especially during the summer when it's powwow season, dance season, I guess you could say. And then off to my right here, we have some more examples of some incredible beadwork. This is a leggin from around early 1900s, again, late 19th century. And it displays some of the prominent, highlights of Crow beadwork. So you see the colors there. You see a light baby blue. That's real prominent in Crow beadwork. You see this yellow alongside the green. That's also something that we see pretty common in Crow design. And all of these beadwork designs originally came from parfleche designs on rawhide containers that were used back in the old days. And then off here to the right, we have, again, this from the late 19th century. This is from around circa 1890. And this is what they call a estimated, this is a pipe bag, estimated at 1890. And it's kind of a smaller pipe bag. It could also be used for a number of other things. But of course the pipes were sacred to the Crow people. Here you see the common pink that's utilized in the Crow designs, and this diamond shape. It's also pretty prominent within the Crow culture, and then highlighted by these red squares in the corners. Okay, let's go ahead and move on into my PowerPoint here. Let's look at some photos and talk a little bit more about Crow Fair. I'm going to ask Angie to go ahead and cue things up. And I'll talk a little bit about the Crow tribe. The Crow tribe is actually one of the older groups here, tribal groups in the Yellowstone region. The Yellowstone River, known as the Elk River to my tribe, was in the center of their world, I guess you could say. And they had two major factions, the River Crow and the Mountain Crow, who lived on either side of what we now know of as the Yellowstone River. The entire Yellowstone National Park was part of the original Crow Indian Reservation back in the 1850 Fort Laramie Treaty. Here we see a photo from around 1930 of some dancing that was going on at Crow Fair, and you can tell by that man standing there and the young fella behind him that these are traditional Crow dancers by their outfit. Two eagle feathers on top. They have a porcupine quill and horsehair roach along the head, bells alongside, a small bustle in back, and then Angora wool around their ankles above their moccasins. And those are some of the highlights, typically a breastplate as well. But Crow Fair began in 1901, which is interesting. It's also the same year that the very first American Indian Day School was opened in the nation in Lodgegrass. Up until then, all Native Americans were sent to boarding schools throughout the country, so that was a first. And it began as an attempt by the Indian agent at the time to get the Crow people to become farmers, to celebrate their crops every year during harvest season. And so, although it began as an attempt to, encourage the Crows and celebrate the Crows' success in agriculture, it quickly turned into an event that was more a celebration of Crow traditional culture. Go ahead and... and we know it as the New Year. It became known as the Tipi Capitol of the world, especially in the 1960s and 70s. That moniker really stuck. And as I mentioned earlier, there's really no other event that has the same amount of teepees that Crow Fair does. We typically set up over 1,200 teepees a year in an encampment that's just about a mile wide and probably half a mile long. And so pretty intense, pretty high grouping of teepees in that little area there, and they're all white. And so they really stand out, the beauty of them, the poles. You can see in this image here that the poles coming outside the teepees are quite long. And that's the way the Crow people prefer them. They like to have real long teepee poles just to kind of show off the beauty and the design and the elegance of that structure. The teepees, again, are kept white. Unlike a lot of tribes that paint their teepees pretty consistently, think of the Blackfeet. Most families have a tribal design that they use on their lodges. The Crow people, when they received the teepee from a vision from a very young man, were told to keep their homes pure and white. And so that's the reason why you see very few teepees at Crow Fair with any kind of designs on them. If there are, it's typically something that was gifted or a dream that someone had, and so they're allowed to do that in that tradition. Let's go ahead and check out the next image. Crow Fair becomes home to many families to the Crow tribe. There are about 15,000 members in the Crow tribe today. Most of those young people. However, we do have our elders, and they have helped carry on this tradition to the next generations. But it is a home away from home. People bring all kinds of stuff from their homes to help make the camp comfortable. Of course, they eat there, we eat there, our families, and the families use the same campsites year in and year out. And so a lot of the campsites have been used for over 100 years by the same families. And of course, as the families grow, the encampment becomes too small. And so every year we see new camps growing outside, I guess you could say, the suburbs of the main encampment. And so it's a beautiful time. It's a family reunion of sorts for Crow people all throughout the Crow Reservation. And I grew up in the town of Crow Agency, just about a half a mile from where Crow Fair takes place every year. So it was really special for me. And for those of us who live in Crow Agency, when the Crow Fair is over, there's always really a sense of kind of remorse that you have to wait another year to have that experience again. It's just nice to have that sleepy town become so busy, like a Times Square, for about a week steady. So go ahead and let's move on to the next image. Here's a beautiful image here, a photo. This campsite is one of the ones that I mentioned that is not in the main campground. This one here is a newer one that was built up on top of the hill, and so a little more exposed to the sun up there. And here's a beautiful cottonwood branch shade that they constructed to block the sun but allow the breeze to still come through. You can imagine sitting in that shade with the smell of the cottonwood branches and hear them as they rustle with the wind, the breezes. Just a beautiful time, and something that I wish that everyone would have an opportunity to experience in their lifetime, to appreciate that richness of that culture and the heritage and the tradition that still is maintained today. So these structures stay up all year, and of course the branches and other tarps that are used as shade are only used during that week of the fair. Kevin Red Star, the internationally renowned artist from Lodgegrass, Montana, a member of the Crow tribe. One of his best topics is the lodge of the Crow Indian. The cream-colored yellow of the buckskin, along with the fresh colored of the freshly peeled lodgepole pines under the night sky there. He really captures, I think, one of the most romantic images of Crow Fair, but one that all of us really enjoy. One of the things that makes Crow Fair special and unique amongst all of the Northern Plains gatherings, and in fact out of all the tribal gatherings in the nation, is the annual parade on horseback through the encampment. So there are hundreds of riders on horseback, all in full regalia, beadwork, elk tooth dresses. The horses are outfitted with their own beadwork, and it's really quite a sight of pageantry and artistry. And there's really nothing like it in Montana, or as I mentioned, that I know of anywhere in the United States. There are 3 big parades that take place each year on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday of the fair, and it's always a highlight of the morning. So the camp crier drives through the camp about 5:30 in the morning, and he typically has a loudspeaker, and he's speaking in Crow very loud, just to wake everybody up, telling them to get ready, get their horses ready, get their regalia prepared, get cleaned up, get some breakfast, and get ready for the parade. So the parade is a reenactment really of the traditional lifestyle of the Plains Indians. Of course, the Crow people participated in that economic way of life, moving in a circle. These were not people who stayed in the same place all year. And the parades at Crow Fair recognize that wonderful tradition. Moving camp, exchanging traditions, gifts, stories, ceremonies, and everything with your neighbors, as they did. They even developed their own universal language, Plain Sign Language, that came about because of this movement, these circular movements that these tribes engaged in on a seasonal cycle for many, many thousands of years. And so the Crow people, again, recognize and respect that tradition through this parade. During the parade, there are contests for folks who put on traditional regalia. There are different categories. Of course, one of the categories is traditional style Crow men. And here's a photo of 2 brothers who use traditional style pompadour bangs, which in the old days was utilized using bear grease and porcupine quill combs. These fellows here probably use some gel or mousse, I suppose. Bear grease is kind of hard to come by these days. And it doesn't smell quite as good as Vidal Sassoon. So I'm sure they probably were thinking about that. And you can also see the feathers coming up alongside their head there. And again, this is kind of more of a traditional Crow style men regalia. Also the dentalium necklaces. And the again, traditional Crow men color of pink and baby blue. And those colors are traditional Crow men colors, I was told, largely because when it gets about 30, 40 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit, when you get up in the morning to watch the sun come up, right over here on the east, it's going to be all pink and baby blue. And it's only at that time that you see those colors, and so that's the reason why you see them reflected with the Crow colors scheme. And the designs that you see the Crow people use also come from the sky, except the night sky. Here are some traditional Crow dancers again that that style is so unique to the Crow people. It really stands out. You see the breastplate, the bells representing rattlesnakes, use of that medicine as you move around, the powerful medicine that those snakes have. The wool at the ankles representing the mountain goats, so that they'll be sure-footed and will not trip, fall down, or anything like that. The breastplates showing their warrior tradition, what that help protect them during battle. The two feathers on top that represent two brothers out hunting, all looking around for the game. So these are some of the more prominent features of the traditional Crow men's outfits, war dance outfits. Here's a beautiful young lady parading. Her horse doesn't have a lot of beadwork on it, but it is decorated with Pendleton blankets. For Native people, Pendleton blankets became a real desirable trade item, not necessarily for their utilitarian use, but because of their colors and the designs that were on them that made them look so beautiful. So they immediately became something that were highly valued by Crow people and other tribal people in the Northern Plains. And you can see those designs not just in the Pendleton, but with the other beadwork and tapestry that she has on her horse. So she's using a buckskin dress, beaded buckskin dress, and it can be pretty hot on a hot August day. There we go, hot August sun. Here's a young lady who's shielding herself from the sun with the eagle feather fan. She's wearing a wool dress with elk teeth. Most of those elk teeth are likely imitation elk teeth. They can be purchased at your local imitation elk tooth store, and a lot of them plastic. But as I mentioned, traditionally, ideally, only 2 teeth could be taken from an elk, the eye teeth, to be used on the dress. So if you have a dress that has 400 teeth on it, that means you would have to have harvested 200 elk. And so that's a pretty significant number of elk for just one dress. So, but that showed, again, the prominence that Crow people had in hunting, their hunting skills, and their ability to be self-sufficient, completely self-sufficient off of a wild landscape. Here we see some young fellas dancing. When you go to the powwow, the Crow Fair powwow, you see the dancing starts at a very early age. As soon as kids are able to walk, if they come from a dancing family, they're out there in the arena. They have a special giveaway to their friends. Their family helps them give away when their child has their first dance. This is part of the tradition of entering that dance circle. And it's the type of thing, of course, that you do right up until you can no longer walk. And so dancing is seen by the Crow people as a celebration of life and health, and something that continues strong to this day. Here's another example of an elk tooth dress. Young lady holding what's known as a peyote feather fan. Underneath that is a cougar mountain lion pelt. And then we have some engraved leather there, just part of the regalia that is so colorful at the Crow Fair. Here we see a young lady on a Shetland pony, and we see a lot of these at Crow Fair. When you're a young person at Crow Fair, getting around on your own horse or on your own bike is part of the freedom, part of the joy of the fair. Here we see the grand entry in the evening. We see a wide variety of dancers. They're traditional and contemporary dancers at Crow Fair. And the contemporary dancers are pretty fun to watch. They're quite athletic. They really move quickly. spinning in a lot of circles. Here we see a young lady in a purple fancy shawl dress. The fancy shawl dancers extending their arms while they dance and spin in a circle. It's hard to imagine doing that and not getting dizzy. I certainly couldn't do it. Then in the background there, you see some what we know of as prairie chicken dancers. That's more of a traditional style of dance from a little bit further north. There's also an all-Indian rodeo, and that's it's been going on for about, I believe, 50 years, and it's one of the best places to go during the heat of the day, during the Crow Fair, before the dancing starts. So there could be some dancing earlier in the day, but during the break, during the late afternoon, it's nice to go to the rodeo. You can see some incredible cowboys, some pretty rank horses, as they say. Also at the rodeo, there's a Indian relay that occurs on a daily basis. And the Indian relay is, without a doubt, the most exciting event outside of the bull riding. The Indian relay is a team of riders on bareback, racing around the track, having to exchange horses, and it gets to be pretty exciting. So I encourage everyone to get out there and go visit the Crow Fair and the rodeo this summer. Again, it's the best way to get out of the heat of the day during the Crow Fair. Later on in the evening, you can go back to the dances and you can see some men's contemporary fancy dances. These style of dances really came about in the 20th century. And they were brought about to bring more interest from tourists and from other folks who were curious about native dancing, but wanted to see something a little bit more entertaining. And so these fancy dancers are now a big part of the tradition throughout Indian country. Of course, at Crow Fair, one of the highlights of the dancers. And here we see a fellow using a lot of different colors, a lot of different types of materials, ribbons, polyester, a lot of stuff that we wouldn't consider to be traditional, but has now become traditional as part of the contemporary powwow. And you know, the dances, again, that these fellows are doing are very difficult to do without being highly athletic and really well conditioned. They have to dance very quickly, and it really takes a lot out of a person. Here's a little boy. I wrote on here, face paint was gifted. And so when you see children like this with face paint on, this was an indication that he was given this design by an elder in his family, and it would be impossible to say what that design means or why he was the one who inherited it. You would have to ask him, you would have to ask the family why he was given the right to paint his face that way. In the Crow culture, no one paints their face unless there's good reason for it. As I mentioned earlier, no one paints their teepees as well unless there was some kind of significant reason. The last event at the Crow Fair is the parade dance. You can see these ladies here with their elk tooth dresses, wool dresses, hot August sun, probably in the afternoon here, the crisp blue sky in the background, the teepee's still up. The parade dance occurs on Monday after the main fair has ended. So after the powwow is over and the rodeo is over, and most of the concessions, the folks who sell corn dogs and jewelry and everything else, children's toys, have all left, and everything kind of starts to die down. That's when the parade happens on Monday afternoon. And the parade dance starts about noon and it lasts until about 6 o'clock that evening. And they dance at all four corners of the campground. And there's a special song that is sung. There's a special protocol that is used as they move around the campground. And we're told that you're not supposed to take your teepee down until that dance has moved past your campground. So most of the teepees at Crow Fair stay up right through Tuesday to respect that tradition of the parade dance. The parade dance comes from a vision, a dream that a man had. And in his dream, he saw a bunch of animals getting ready to move camp. And as they formed a circle to do a dance, the birds came to help them do this dance. And it was the birds who told this man, when you move camp, you should repeat this tradition. And so that's the reason why the parade dance is used at Crow Fair. And then when Crow Fair is all over on that Monday evening, things are pretty serene. You can see this beautiful night sky. The next day, on Tuesday evening, are the Crow Fair elections, and they're held at the Arbor, where the dances had been held for the past 5 days. And at the election, next year's manager is elected, and other folks who will be putting on the Crow Fair for the next year gain their positions officially. So they have a whole year to plan for next year's Crow Fair. Just this past year, 2018, was the 100th anniversary of Crow Fair. Even though Crow Fair started in 1901, there were several years where it did not occur during World War I and World War II. And so this is one of the reasons why they called the 2018 the 100th annual. And so we're looking forward to the 101st annual Crow Fair in 2019. I encourage you to come visit. There's a campsite for you there at Crow Fair if you wish to come. There's lots of places for guests, tourists. The Crow people have just begun offering lodges to rent as well. Rose Williamson is one of the contact people if you're interested in that. She's also a tour guide up at the Little Bighorn National Monument. And so come to Crow Fair, come experience the pageantry, the culture. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience, and you can say officially that you made it through another new year once you've completed your stay at Crow Fair. So thank you so much for tuning in this afternoon. Are there any questions that I could answer?
Could you tell us a little bit about the founding of the various agencies? Like how did the agency end up over there at Crow Agency?
Great question, Michael. As I mentioned earlier, the Crow people, actually, the term Crow is actually a misnomer for the tribe. Our name for ourselves is Apsaalooke. And so the Apsaalooke people, otherwise known as Crow, have been around this region, as I mentioned, for over 500 years. We know that. And the very first treaty that was signed with my tribe in 1850 came about because of the California Gold Rush, and it was signed at Fort Laramie. And in that treaty, my tribe maintained a 30 million acre land base. Then again, another treaty was signed in 1868 at the end of the Bozeman Trail days, or the fight that ended the Bozeman Trail. And it was that 1868 treaty that established the first Crow agency just about 10 miles east of Livingston on Mission Creek. And that was called Fort Parker. And so that fort was there from 1869 to 1875. And my great-great-grandparents were married there, so a little bit of history for me. Later on, the agency, the reservation shrank again, and the agency was moved from Mission Creek, which is really located just right on Interstate 90 today, down to the second Crow agency, located just south of present-day Apsaalooke. That town, Apsaalooke, comes from the term Apsaalooke, which was kind of mispronounced and then misspelled, but is a representation of the traditional name of the Crow people. And so that agency was there from 1875 to 1884. And then in 1884, the railroad, the Transcontinental Railroad was completed through the Yellowstone Valley, which really established Billings as a major hub. And the agency was moved to its final location where it's located today on the Little Bighorn River, just about 2 miles north of where the Little Bighorn battle occurred back in on June 25th, 1876. And so that's another great time to be in Crow country. During June, the latter half of June, during the summertime, there's reenactment that occurs of the battle. My dad, stepdad, Richard Reelbird, and his brothers put on that reenactment. It's always a great show. I encourage folks to come check that out. Those are the two best times to be in Crow country, either during Crow Native Days, again, which is around June 25th every summer, and Crow Fair. And both of those times, if you are interested in seeing dancing, singing, horseback riding, rodeo, any kind of regalia or traditions, that's the time to come to Crow country. And we really encourage you to do that. We love guests. We love folks to come in and bless us with their good fortune. We say in Crow country, when you go to visit someone, you bring them good luck. So again, we encourage you to come visit us and have good fortune in your travels. I could sing should I sing a song? This is the Crow flag song, which is sung, of course, during Crow Fair to honor veterans. Just a little background on that song. If you do come to Crow Fair and hear this type of music, this plain style of music here is prominent throughout America, which is really interesting. You can go from coast to coast, Florida to California, New York to Washington, and whenever you go to a powwow, you'll hear this Plains Indian style music. And I think there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is it's just a very powerful form of music. Some of you might be wondering what I was saying in that song. That's a question that is often asked. And for most Northern Plains songs, there are no words in them. So I guess you could say that this type of song that's being sung is more of a vocal. And it doesn't necessarily have words in it. That song there had a few words at the end, and it was saying, look at the flag, look at that man dancing under the flag, he's a soldier. So that song again was meant to honor the veterans and primarily those who are participating in the color guard that lead the way during the grand entry for all of the dancers during the powwow. So, and most of the powwows, if you go to them, they're all going to have that same basic format. You'll see the color guard coming in, and you'll hear a flag song similar to that to honor the veterans.
So Shane, you grew up basically right across the river from where Crow Fair takes place. What was that like?
Oh, it was awesome. You know, growing up right across the river from where Crow Fair was at, you couldn't wait every year for it to start. And that campground is set aside. And so throughout the year, it's used by the community in so many different ways. You know, during the wintertime, we would tie our sleds onto the back of our uncle's trucks and have them drive us around the loop. Of course, during the summertime, we ran there and rode our bikes on the little hills that were just behind the encampment. And then when Crow Fair started, it again was like the biggest family reunion that you can imagine. That it just lasted straight through for 2 weeks, and the constant buzz, the cars, just the laughter, the goodwill, the good feelings, that sense again of coming together and being so close to that. It was just a magical experience, I think, for me. And I guess the worst part of it, being right next to that spot there, is that when it's over, you really get a sense of it all being over. And everyone else who didn't live there, they got to go back to their hometown, and it was pretty much the same way it was when they left it. But for those of us who lived so close to the Crow Fair, it's always, again, kind of a remorseful time that we have to wait another full year to do that again. It's also a lot of work. You know, I mean, as fun as it is and as good as it is to be with your loved ones and to celebrate your culture and tradition, there's a lot of work, there's a lot of time that goes into it. Just harvesting teepee poles themselves is quite a task. If you don't want to harvest them, you have to purchase them. And you're looking at about $400 for a set of poles. Just the teepee itself is not a cheap expense. All the other camping equipment that goes along with it, and then the time, of course, that you spend. And so there is a commitment that has to be made, I think, to really participate in the Crow Fair the way that the Crow people believe in doing. And that's one of the things that has kept it unique and strong all these years. And you know, every year, year after year, you know, Crow people show up. They make that commitment to that campsite and to their loved ones, and it's a great tradition. Hopefully, something that will always continue. You know, as I mentioned, all of the tribes have their own traditions. Blackfeet, Northern Cheyenne, all of them, especially in Montana, very strong traditions. The biggest thing that separates Crow Fair from all of those traditions is the teepee encampment, the size of it, and the parades that we saw. So just a great part of that traditional way of life.
So I'm sure there are a lot of our viewers today who've never been to Montana and are really not very familiar with what you know, kind of what the land base is of the Crow Reservation. I know to the south are the Pryor Mountains. Is there a particular significance for the Crow people related to the Pryors?
Oh, absolutely. You know, all the mountain ranges are significant to the Crow people. Our oral tradition had us walking to Montana from the Great Lakes region over 500 years ago. And we came out here following a man's dream about a plant that he saw. And in his dream, he was told that when they found that plant at that area in the mountains here in this region, they would know that they were home. And so the Bighorn, the Pryor, you know, pretty much all these mountains that we know of are kind of representative of that. Probably none more so than the Bighorns. But the Pryor Mountains are quite unique and special for many reasons. You know, historically a very important, prominent fasting place for leaders who would go and go without food and water there for dreams. There are also many traditional historic spots within the Pryor Mountains that are related to real interesting Crow stories and traditions, such as the Little People. You know, there are stories of little people that live in the Pryor Mountains. They're interesting, unique range when you get up there and start to explore them. And isn't that the case with all the ranges in Montana? Every single one of them has their own unique characteristics. And until you come to Montana and experience that, get out there and walk around and see, you won't get a sense of the magic that all of us who live here just love so much about this place. You have your major Rocky Mountains, but you have your island ranges, and the Pryors are part of them. The Crazy Mountains, again, are another sensational range known as the Alps of Montana. And just so many that we could go, you know, I could go on and on. Again, as I mentioned, and I'll just kind of maybe close with this, the Crow Fair was started as an attempt by the Indian agents to get the Crow people to become agriculturalists and no longer hunter-gatherers. What they did not really realize was that we had been agriculturalists, some of the best agriculturalists in the world for many hundreds of years, over 1,000 years here in North America, with corn, beans, and squash. But as we came out onto the Great Plains, we realized that it was a much safer bet to adapt to the wild plants of the region than to try to maintain that difficult niche of being a farmer, especially here in Montana, where here we are on May 1st waking up to snow and 27 degrees without a wind chill. So for those of you who are not from Montana, you come here and you'll figure it out real quick.
Well, thank you so much, Shane.
Thank you.
Excellent work as always. Love having you here.
Great to be here.
Again, Michael Fox here with Museum of the Rockies. Any comments or anything we want to close out with? Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again here soon.
Thank you.
Thanks.